The rain hammered against the cracked asphalt as Maya, a beautiful German shepherd with amber eyes, limped through the empty streets. Her thick coat, once golden brown and pristine, was now matted with mud and soaked to the bone. But nothing could stop her. Not the pain shooting through her injured paw, not the exhaustion weighing down her body, and certainly not the storm raging above. In her mouth, she carried something more precious than her own life, her tiny puppy, barely 3 weeks old. The little one hung limp and motionless, his breathing so shallow it was almost undetectable. Maya's heart pounded with terror as she felt his small body growing colder against her tongue. She had already lost 2 of her babies to the harsh streets, and she wouldn't lose another. Maya had been living as a stray for months after being abandoned by her previous owners when they moved away. She had managed to survive on scraps and the kindness of occasional strangers, but when her puppies were born in an old cardboard box behind a grocery store, everything changed. The other 2 had been too weak to survive the cold nights, despite her desperate attempts to keep them warm. Now her last remaining baby was fighting for his life, and she knew she had only hours, maybe less, to save him. As she rounded the corner onto Maple Street, Maya's keen senses picked up something that made her heart leap with hope. Through the storm, she could smell warmth, safety, and something else, the scent of someone who cared for animals. Her instincts, honed by months of survival, told her that the person in the house ahead might be her puppy's only chance. The house stood modest but welcoming, with a small porch light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Maya had passed this way before during her desperate searches for food, and she had noticed something different about this place. There were no angry shouts when she approached, no thrown objects to chase her away. Instead, she had sometimes seen a man through the window, and his scent carried kindness, the same scent she remembered from the veterinarian who had once helped her when she was just a young dog herself. Dr. James Mitchell was inside, unaware that his life was about to change forever. He had moved to this quiet neighborhood 6 months ago, seeking peace after a devastating loss that had shaken his faith in everything he once believed. As a veterinarian, he had dedicated his life to saving animals. But when he couldn't save his own beloved dog, Max, from cancer, something inside him had broken. He had closed his practice, sold his clinic, and retreated from the world, convinced that all his years of training and experience meant nothing if he couldn't save the one life that mattered most to him. Maya approached the front door, her legs trembling from exhaustion and fear. She could feel her puppy's life slipping away with each passing second. The little one's breathing had become even more labored, and his tiny body felt like ice against her mouth. She had to act now, or she would lose him forever. With a determination born of pure maternal love, Maya began to scratch at the door. Her claws made desperate scraping sounds against the wood, and she whimpered softly, a sound that seemed to carry all the anguish of a mother's breaking heart. When that didn't work, she began to paw at the door more urgently, her whimpers growing louder and more desperate. Inside, James was sitting in his dimly lit living room, staring blankly at a medical journal he hadn't really been reading. The sound of scratching at his door made him look up, confused. At first he thought it might be a branch blown by the storm. But then he heard the whimpering, a sound so full of desperation and pain that it cut straight through his emotional numbness. He approached the door cautiously, his hand hesitating on the handle. He had been avoiding contact with animals since Max's death, the pain still too raw, too overwhelming. But something about those sounds, the urgency, the pleading quality, made it impossible to ignore. When James opened the door, he was completely unprepared for what he saw. There stood a soaking wet German shepherd, her eyes wild with desperation and fear, holding something small and still in her mouth. The dog looked up at him with such hope and trust that it took his breath away. Without hesitation, she gently placed the tiny puppy at his feet and stepped back, her eyes never leaving his face. The sight of the nearly lifeless puppy sent a jolt of recognition through James's professional instincts. Even in his emotional withdrawal from veterinary work, he could see immediately that this little one was in critical condition. The puppy's breathing was barely perceptible, his tiny body hypothermic and showing signs of severe dehydration. This wasn't just a sick animal. This was a life hanging by the thinnest of threads. Maya sat back on her haunches, her whole body trembling, not just from the cold and rain, but from the overwhelming trust she was placing in this stranger. Her amber eyes held a message that transcended species. "Please save my baby. You're his only hope." James knelt down beside the tiny puppy, his hands automatically moving with the precision of years of veterinary training. Even as his heart raced with emotions he thought he had buried forever. The little one was barely larger than his palm, his grey and black fur matted and damp. The puppy's eyes were still closed, too young to have opened them yet, and his breathing was so shallow that James had to look closely to see the tiny chest rising and falling. "Oh, little guy," James whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "What happened to you?" Maya watched intently as James gently picked up her baby, her ears perked forward and her entire body tense with anticipation. She could sense something different about this man, something in his touch that spoke of knowledge and care. Her maternal instincts told her she had made the right choice, but her heart was still pounding with fear for her puppy's life. James looked up at Maya, seeing the desperation and hope in her eyes. "Okay, Mama," he said softly. "Let's see what we can do." He quickly carried the puppy inside, Maya following close behind without invitation. She seemed to understand that this man was her puppy's only chance, and she wasn't going to leave his side now. James headed straight to what used to be his home office, where he had kept some basic veterinary supplies, even after closing his practice. His hands moved with muscle memory as he gathered what he needed: a heating pad, some towels, a stethoscope, and other emergency supplies. As he worked, Maya positioned herself nearby, close enough to watch every move but careful not to interfere. Her eyes never left her puppy, and soft whimpers escaped her throat, the sounds of a mother's anguish and hope intertwined. James wrapped the puppy in warm, dry towels and placed him on the heating pad, set to a low, safe temperature. Using his stethoscope, he listened to the tiny heart. It was beating but weakly and irregularly. The puppy's body temperature was dangerously low, and there were signs of dehydration and possible malnutrition. "He's hypothermic," James murmured, more to himself than to Maya, though she seemed to hang on every word. "His blood sugar is probably critically low and he's severely dehydrated." As he began to work, something remarkable happened. The part of James that had shut down after losing Max, the part that had made him question his purpose and abilities, slowly began to awaken. The familiar rhythm of assessment, diagnosis, and treatment started to flow through him like a river, finding its course after a long drought. He prepared a warm sugar solution and carefully administered it to the puppy using a small syringe. Just a few drops at a time to avoid overwhelming the tiny system. Maya watched with intense concentration, as if she understood that every action could mean the difference between life and death for her baby. "Come on, little fighter," James whispered as he continued the painstaking process of stabilizing the puppy. "Your mama brought you to the right place. She believes in you and she believes in me. I can't let either of you down." The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a man who had given up on his calling because he couldn't save one life, now fighting desperately to save another. But something about Maya's trust, her absolute faith in bringing her dying puppy to his door, sparked something in him that he thought was gone forever. Hours passed as James worked tirelessly. He monitored the puppy's temperature, administered fluids, and provided gentle stimulation to encourage circulation. Maya never moved from her spot, her eyes switching between her baby and James, as if she were silently willing both of them to succeed. Around midnight, something miraculous happened. The tiny puppy's breathing became slightly stronger, and he made a small movement, just a tiny shift, but it was the first sign of life they'd seen since Maya had brought him in. Both James and Maya noticed it immediately, and the hope in the room became almost tangible. "Did you see that?" James said to Maya, his voice filled with excitement. "He moved! He's fighting!" Maya's tail gave a small, cautious wag, the first sign of joy she had shown all evening. She moved slightly closer, her nose twitching as she tried to assess her baby's condition through scent. But James knew they weren't out of danger yet. The next few hours would be critical. The puppy needed constant monitoring, regular feeding, and careful temperature control. It would be a long night, and success was far from guaranteed. As if reading his thoughts, Maya settled down on the floor beside the heating pad, clearly indicating that she had no intention of leaving. Her message was clear. They were in this together now, and she trusted him completely with the most precious thing in her world. James looked down at this beautiful, devoted mother and felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt since Max died. Maya's unwavering love for her puppy, her incredible journey through the storm, her absolute trust in a stranger's ability to help, it was all awakening something in James that he thought was lost forever. "Okay, Mama," he said softly, settling in for the long vigil ahead. "We're going to save your baby. I promise you that." As the storm continued to rage outside, inside that small room, 3 lives hung in the balance. A tiny puppy fighting for every breath, a mother who had risked everything for love, and a broken man slowly discovering that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from saving ourselves, but from saving others. The night was far from over, and the real miracle was just beginning to unfold. The clock on James's wall ticked steadily toward 3 a.m., each second feeling like an eternity as he monitored the tiny puppy's fragile vital signs. The little fighter had shown those encouraging signs of movement earlier, but his condition remained critical. James knew from his years of veterinary experience that the next few hours would determine whether this brave little soul would survive or slip away despite their best efforts. Maya hadn't moved from her position beside the heating pad. Her large brown eyes remained fixed on her baby, occasionally glancing up at James with a mixture of gratitude and desperate hope. Every few minutes, she would let out a soft whimper, as if asking for updates on her puppy's condition. James found himself talking to her, explaining what he was doing in gentle tones that seemed to comfort both of them. "His temperature is slowly coming up," James murmured as he checked the thermometer. "That's good news, Mama. Your little guy's a fighter just like his mother." The puppy's breathing had become slightly more regular, though it was still concerningly shallow. James continued the delicate process of providing supportive care, warming the tiny body, administering small amounts of sugar solution, and monitoring for any changes. He had set up a makeshift intensive care unit in his home office, using equipment he had kept from his veterinary practice. As he worked, memories of his old clinic began flooding back. He remembered countless nights like this one, fighting to save animals that others had given up on. There had been victories and losses, moments of pure joy and heartbreaking defeats. But somewhere along the way, after losing Max, he had forgotten why he became a veterinarian in the first place. It wasn't just about the science or the medicine. It was about the bond between humans and animals, the trust that creatures like Maya placed in him, and the incredible privilege of being able to heal. Around 4 a.m., James noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The puppy's tiny paws began to paddle slightly, as if he were dreaming of running or playing. It was such a small movement, barely perceptible, but it represented something huge. Brain function, neurological response, the sign of a mind that was fighting to stay connected to the world. "Maya, look," James whispered excitedly, pointing to her baby's tiny movements. "He's dreaming. That means his brain is getting enough oxygen. He's getting stronger." Maya's ears perked up immediately, and she moved her head closer to see what James was pointing out. When she saw her puppy's little paws moving, her tail began to wag more enthusiastically than it had all night. She let out a soft bark, not loud enough to disturb the tiny patient, but enough to express her joy and relief. But James knew better than to celebrate too early. Hypothermic puppies could show signs of improvement, only to crash again if they weren't carefully monitored. He continued his vigilant care, checking temperature, heart rate, and breathing every 15 minutes. The puppy would need regular feeding soon, tiny amounts of specially formulated milk replacer that would give him the nutrition he desperately needed. As dawn began to break outside, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold, James realized that something profound was happening inside him. For months, he had been going through the motions of living, haunted by his perceived failure to save Max. He had convinced himself that his years of training and experience were meaningless if he couldn't save the ones he loved most. But watching Maya's unwavering devotion to her puppy, seeing her trust in his abilities, even when he had lost faith in himself, was slowly rebuilding something he thought was broken forever. The puppy stirred again, this time making a tiny sound, barely audible, but it was there. Maya immediately responded with gentle licking motions toward her baby, though she was careful not to interfere with the warming setup James had created. Her maternal instincts were strong, but she seemed to understand that this human was helping in ways she couldn't. "I think he's trying to vocalize," James said with growing excitement. "That's another excellent sign. His respiratory system is getting stronger, and he's alert enough to try to communicate." James prepared the first real feeding of milk replacer, warming it to exactly the right temperature and loading it into a specialized feeding syringe designed for newborn puppies. This would be a crucial test. If the puppy could take nutrition and keep it down, his chances of survival would improve dramatically. Maya watched intently as James positioned the tiny syringe near her puppy's mouth. The little one's sucking reflex was weak but present, and slowly, drop by drop, he began to take in the life-giving nutrition. Maya's tail wagged harder with each successful drop, and James felt his own heart soaring with hope. "That's it, little guy," James encouraged softly. "Nice and slow. You're doing so well." The feeding took nearly an hour, with frequent breaks to ensure the puppy didn't become overwhelmed. Maya remained patient throughout the entire process, somehow understanding that this painstaking care was exactly what her baby needed. When the feeding was finally complete, the puppy settled back into sleep. But it was a different kind of sleep, deeper, more peaceful, the sleep of a body that was finally beginning to heal. As the morning light grew stronger, James realized that neither he nor Maya had slept all night. But instead of feeling exhausted, he felt more alive than he had in months. The familiar rhythm of veterinary care, the satisfaction of seeing a patient respond to treatment, the incredible bond he was forming with Maya, all of it was reminding him why he had fallen in love with veterinary medicine in the first place. "We're going to make it, aren't we, Mama?" James said to Maya, reaching out to gently stroke her head. She leaned into his touch, her eyes still focused on her puppy but clearly grateful for the human contact. "Your baby is going to be okay, and somehow, I think you've helped save me too." By 9 a.m., the puppy had survived his first critical night, and James felt cautiously optimistic about the little one's chances. The tiny patient had taken 3 successful feedings, his body temperature had stabilized, and his breathing was noticeably stronger. Maya had finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though she maintained her vigilant watch over her baby. James realized he needed to address some practical concerns. Maya looked exhausted and probably hadn't eaten in days. The devoted mother had been so focused on saving her puppy that she had neglected her own needs. If she was going to continue nursing and caring for her baby as he recovered, she needed proper nutrition and rest. "Okay, Maya," James said gently. "I think your little guy is stable enough for me to take care of you for a few minutes. You need food and water." At first, Maya was reluctant to leave her puppy's side. When James stood up and gestured toward the kitchen, she looked torn between following him and staying with her baby. James understood her dilemma completely. As a mother, every instinct told her not to leave her vulnerable infant, even for a moment. "I'll stay right here where you can see both of us," James assured her, moving to a position where Maya could keep visual contact with her puppy while also coming to the kitchen area. "You can't take care of him if you don't take care of yourself first." Slowly, Maya rose from her position, her movements stiff from lying in one spot all night. James could see she was favoring one of her paws, probably an injury from her desperate journey through the storm. He made a mental note to examine her thoroughly once her puppy was completely out of danger. James prepared a bowl of warm water and some high-quality dog food he happened to have in his pantry, a remnant from his days with Max that he had never been able to throw away. Maya approached the food cautiously, her head constantly turning to check on her puppy. But once she began eating, her hunger became apparent. She ate quickly but carefully, her body desperately needing the nutrition after days of surviving on scraps and the enormous physical demands of nursing. While Maya ate, James used the opportunity to really observe her. Despite her current bedraggled state, she was clearly a beautiful, well-bred German Shepherd. Her bone structure was excellent. Her coat, though dirty and matted, showed signs of having once been magnificent, and her temperament was exceptional. This wasn't a dog that had been born on the streets. She had obviously been someone's beloved pet before circumstances forced her into homelessness. "What's your story, beautiful girl?" James asked softly as Maya finished eating and returned to her puppy's side. How did you end up out there alone with babies to care for? Maya settled back into her watching position, but James noticed she was sitting closer to him than before, close enough that he could reach out and touch her if needed. The invisible barrier of distrust that existed between them was beginning to dissolve, replaced by a partnership born of shared concern for the tiny life they were both protecting. James decided it was time to give the puppy another feeding, and this time Maya watched the process with less anxiety and more curiosity. She seemed to be learning, understanding that James's actions were helping her baby grow stronger. When James offered to let her help by holding the puppy while he positioned the feeding syringe, Maya's response surprised him. She carefully nuzzled her baby into a better position and then looked up at James with what could only be described as approval. It was a moment of pure communication between species, a recognition that they were partners in this healing process. The feeding went even better than the previous ones. The puppy's sucking reflex was stronger, and he took nearly twice as much nutrition. His color was improving too. The grayish pallor was giving way to a healthier pink tone, especially around his nose and paw pads. "Look at that," James said with genuine excitement. "His circulation is improving. That's a really good sign." As if responding to the optimistic tone, the puppy made a small sound. Not quite a bark, but definitely a vocalization. Maya immediately perked up, her tail wagging as she heard her baby's voice for what might have been the first time in days. James realized that this was a turning point. The puppy was not just surviving now, he was beginning to thrive. But more than that, something was changing in James himself. The cynicism and despair that had consumed him for months were being replaced by something he had almost forgotten: hope. His phone rang, startling all three of them. It was his former colleague and friend, Dr. Sarah Chen, calling from the emergency veterinary clinic where she worked. She had been trying to reach him for weeks, worried about his isolation and hoping to convince him to return to practice. "James, I've been so worried about you. How are you doing?" Sarah's voice was filled with genuine concern. James looked down at Maya and her puppy, both depending on him completely, and realized something had fundamentally changed. "Sarah, I think I'm doing better than I have in months. Actually, I could use your advice on a case." "A case? James, are you treating an animal? That's wonderful." As James explained the situation with Maya and her puppy, he felt the familiar excitement of discussing a challenging case with a colleague. Sarah listened intently, offering suggestions and support, but more importantly, she heard something in James's voice that had been missing for a long time: passion, purpose, and hope. "James, what you're doing is incredible," Sarah said. "This mother dog's trust in you is extraordinary. Animals have an instinct about people. They know who they can trust with their most precious possessions. She chose you for a reason." After hanging up, James sat quietly for a moment. Maya pressed against his side, while her puppy slept peacefully on the warming pad. Sarah was right. Maya had chosen him. Out of all the houses on all the streets in the city, she had brought her dying baby to his door. It wasn't coincidence or luck. Somehow, this amazing mother had sensed that he was exactly who she and her puppy needed. The afternoon passed peacefully, with regular feedings and monitoring. The puppy was growing visibly stronger with each passing hour, and Maya was beginning to show signs of the confident, beautiful dog she truly was beneath the trauma and exhaustion. As evening approached, James realized that in less than 24 hours, his entire world had changed. A desperate mother's trust had awakened something in him that he thought was lost forever: his calling, his purpose, and his faith in his own abilities to heal and help. "Thank you, Maya," he whispered to the sleeping dog. "Thank you for reminding me who I really am." 3 days had passed since Maya first appeared at James's door, and the transformation in all three of their lives was nothing short of miraculous. The tiny puppy, whom James had started calling Storm in honor of the night he arrived, had not only survived, but was beginning to show the spirited personality that would define him for the rest of his life. Storm's eyes had finally opened on the second day, revealing beautiful blue-gray orbs that seemed to hold an old soul's wisdom despite his tender age. When he first saw James leaning over him during a feeding, the puppy had made what could only be described as a sound of recognition, as if he somehow knew that this man had saved his life. Maya had watched this first meeting between her baby and his rescuer with such pride and gratitude that James felt his heart might burst. Now Storm was strong enough to nurse from his mother again, though James continued supplemental feedings to ensure he was getting enough nutrition. The puppy had grown noticeably stronger, his tiny body filling out and his movements becoming more coordinated. He could hold his head up steadily and was beginning to show interest in the world around him. Maya had blossomed during these 3 days in ways that took James's breath away. With proper food, rest and medical care for the injured paw he had discovered and treated, she was revealing herself to be an absolutely stunning dog. Her coat was beginning to shine again as James brushed out the mats and tangles, revealing the rich golden brown coloring that made her amber eyes look like liquid gold. More importantly, the haunted, desperate look in her eyes was being replaced by something James could only describe as peace. But the most remarkable change was in the relationship developing between James and Maya. What had started as a desperate plea for help had evolved into something much deeper, a partnership, a friendship, and a mutual healing that neither of them had expected. James had set up a comfortable area in his living room where Maya could care for Storm while staying close to the warmth and safety of the house. She had claimed a spot on a large, soft blanket near the fireplace, and James often found himself sitting nearby, sometimes reading veterinary journals he hadn't touched in months, sometimes just watching the peaceful scene of mother and puppy together. You know, Maya," James said one evening as he sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, "I think Storm is going to be just fine, but I'm starting to wonder what happens next." Maya lifted her head from where she had been gently grooming her puppy and looked directly at James. Her expression was so intelligent, so understanding, that he almost felt like she was about to answer him in words. The truth was, James had been avoiding thinking about the future. These 3 beings had become his world so quickly that the thought of them leaving felt impossible to bear. But he knew Maya wasn't his dog. She belonged to someone, somewhere. The responsible thing would be to help reunite her with her family, no matter how much it might hurt. That evening, James made the difficult decision to start looking for Maya's original owners. He took several photos of her and Storm and prepared to post them on social media and contact local animal shelters. Maya seemed to sense his internal struggle because she moved closer to him, resting her large head against his leg in a gesture of comfort that brought tears to his eyes. "I have to try to find your family, beautiful girl," he whispered, stroking her soft ears, "even though the selfish part of me wants to keep you both forever." Maya's response was to gently place her paw on his hand, as if telling him she understood. But there was something in her eyes that seemed to say she had already found her family, right here with him. The next morning, James posted Maya's photo with the caption, "Found. Beautiful German Shepherd with newborn puppy. Mother and baby are healthy and safe. Please share to help reunite this amazing family with their owners." Within hours, his phone was ringing constantly. James's heart sank as he realized how many people were claiming Maya as their own, some clearly hoping to get their hands on a valuable purebred dog, others genuinely believing she might be their lost pet. He would need to be very careful to ensure Maya only went to her real family. The first potential owner who came to see Maya was a middle-aged man who claimed she had escaped from his yard 2 months ago. But Maya's reaction to him told James everything he needed to know. She cowered behind James's legs, her body language screaming fear and distress. The man became aggressive when James questioned him about specific details regarding Maya's care, and James firmly but politely asked him to leave. 2 more false claimants followed, each interaction making James more protective of Maya and more aware of how much she had come to trust him. She stayed close to his side during each visit, clearly looking to him for protection and guidance. It was the 4th visitor who changed everything. Mrs. Eleanor Watson was an elderly woman who arrived with tears in her eyes and a thick folder of veterinary records, photos, and registration papers. "Her name is Bella," Mrs. Watson said softly, her voice shaking with emotion. "She's been missing for 3 months. I've been searching everywhere for her." Maya, Bella, had been lying peacefully with Storm when Mrs. Watson walked in, but the moment She heard the woman's voice. Her entire body went rigid. She lifted her head, her ears perked forward, and let out a sound that was part whine, part cry of recognition. "Bella, oh my sweet girl, is it really you?" Mrs. Watson's voice was barely a whisper. What happened next broke James's heart, even as it filled him with bittersweet joy. Maya Bella rose slowly, leaving Storm sleeping safely on his blanket, and walked toward Mrs. Watson with a mixture of joy and uncertainty. The reunion was tender and heartbreaking, with Bella allowing herself to be embraced while constantly looking back at James and Storm, as if torn between her past and the present that had saved her life. Mrs. Watson explained through her tears that Bella had escaped during a family gathering when someone had left a gate open. She had been searching desperately ever since, never giving up hope that her beloved dog would return. "But who is this little one?" Mrs. Watson asked, noticing Storm for the first time. "That's Storm," James said softly. "Bella's puppy. He was nearly dead when she brought him to me 3 nights ago." As Mrs. Watson knelt to look at the tiny puppy, Bella moved to stand between all the important beings in her life, her original human, her baby, and the man who had saved them both. Her body language spoke volumes about her internal conflict, and James felt his heart breaking as he realized what this meant. Bella had found her way home, but in doing so, she was about to lose the family she had built with him and Storm. The question now was whether love meant holding on or letting go, and James was about to discover that sometimes the deepest love requires the greatest sacrifice. The living room felt heavy with unspoken emotions as the 4 of them, James, Mrs. Watson, Bella, and tiny Storm, navigated the complex web of love, loss, and loyalty that had suddenly enveloped their lives. Mrs. Watson sat on the floor, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she gently stroked Bella's familiar coat, while Bella herself seemed torn between worlds. "I can't believe she's safe," Mrs. Watson whispered, her voice thick with months of worry and grief. "I've driven every street in this city looking for her. I never stopped believing she'd come home, but I was starting to lose hope." James watched the reunion with a mixture of joy and devastating sadness. It was clear that Bella and Mrs. Watson shared a deep bond. The old woman's love for her dog was genuine and profound, but it was equally clear that something had fundamentally changed in Bella during her time as a stray mother and her 3 days of healing in James's home. Bella kept looking back and forth between Mrs. Watson and James, her intelligent eyes reflecting an internal struggle that seemed almost human in its complexity. When Storm stirred and made a small sound, Bella immediately moved to check on him, but she also kept one eye on both humans, as if trying to figure out how to keep everyone she loved in the same place. Mrs. Watson noticed Bella's divided attention and slowly rose to approach Storm's blanket. "May I?" she asked James softly. "Of course," James replied, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. As Mrs. Watson knelt beside Storm, the tiny puppy opened his blue-gray eyes and looked up at her with curious innocence. "He's beautiful," she breathed. Bella always did have excellent taste in her companions. That simple comment made James's heart clench. Mrs. Watson was clearly a dog person who understood the depth of canine emotions and relationships. She wasn't just claiming her property. She was recognizing that Bella had built a new family and that Storm was precious to her. "Dr. Mitchell," Mrs. Watson said, using the title she had learned from the veterinary records James had shown her as proof of his qualifications to care for Bella and Storm. "I can see what this is costing you. The way Bella looks at you, the way you've cared for her and her baby, this isn't just about veterinary treatment, is it?" James felt exposed by her perceptive question. He had been trying to maintain professional composure, but the truth was written all over his face and in every gentle interaction he had with both Bella and Storm. "No," he admitted quietly. "It's not. They've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to explain." Mrs. Watson nodded slowly, her eyes moving between James, Bella, and Storm. "Would you tell me what happened? The whole story?" For the next hour, James found himself sharing not just the events of the past 3 days, but the emotional journey that had led him to this moment. He told Mrs. Watson about losing Max, about closing his practice, about the devastating loss of faith in his own abilities. He described the desperate night when Bella had appeared at his door, the long vigil over Storm's critical first hours, and the slow awakening of purpose and joy that had followed. Mrs. Watson listened intently, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed she understood both the medical and emotional complexities of what had transpired. Bella remained close throughout the conversation, sometimes resting her head on James's knee, sometimes checking on Storm, always seeming to monitor both humans with careful attention. "Dr. Mitchell," Mrs. Watson finally said, "I think Bella is trying to tell us something." As if summoned by her words, Bella rose and moved to Storm's blanket. She gently picked up her puppy in her mouth and carried him over to where Mrs. Watson and James were sitting. Instead of placing Storm between them, she set him down directly in front of James, then positioned herself so she could touch both humans while keeping her baby close to the man who had saved his life. "I think she's made a choice," Mrs. Watson said softly, tears beginning to flow again. "But it's not the choice I expected." James looked down at Bella, confusion evident in his expression. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Watson reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are all of Bella's papers, her registration, her medical records, her vaccination history. Everything you'd need to make her officially yours." "Mrs. Watson, I couldn't possibly—" "Please let me finish," the elderly woman said gently. "I'm 82 years old, Dr. Mitchell. I love Bella more than words can express, but I've been selfish keeping her when I can barely take care of myself anymore. When she disappeared, part of me wondered if it was the universe telling me it was time to let go. James felt his world shifting beneath him, but she's your dog. She loves you." "Yes, she does love me," Mrs. Watson agreed. "But look at her, Dr. Mitchell. Really look at her. She's not the same dog who left my backyard 3 months ago. She's a mother now, and she's chosen you as her partner in caring for her child. More than that, she's chosen you as her family." Bella seemed to sense the importance of the conversation because she moved closer to James, pressing her warm body against his side while keeping one paw protectively near Storm. "Besides," Mrs. Watson continued with a watery smile, "it sounds like you need each other. Bella has always had excellent judgment about people. If she's decided you're her person now, then I trust her completely." The room fell silent, except for Storm's tiny sleeping sounds and the quiet tick of the wall clock. James felt overwhelmed by the generosity of Mrs. Watson's offer and the magnitude of what was being placed in his hands. "There's one condition," Mrs. Watson added. Then James's heart skipped, wondering what impossible requirement she might have. "What's that?" Mrs. Watson's eyes twinkled with a mischief that reminded James of how Bella sometimes looked when she was being particularly clever. "I want visiting rights, and I want updates. Lots of updates. Photos, videos, stories about how Storm grows up. And maybe, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to help you get back into veterinary practice. This city needs more doctors like you, ones who understand that healing isn't just about medicine, it's about love." James looked down at Bella, who was gazing up at him with those intelligent amber eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the universe. Storm stirred in his sleep, his tiny paw reaching out instinctively for the warmth and safety that had become his world. "Are you sure?" James asked Mrs. Watson, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied firmly. "Bella has found where she belongs, and from what you've told me, so have you." As if to confirm Mrs. Watson's words, Bella rose up on her hind legs and placed her front paws on James's chest, touching her nose to his in the gentlest possible kiss. It was a gesture so full of trust, love, and gratitude that James felt tears spilling down his cheeks. Storm chose that moment to wake up and make a small sound that was definitely becoming more like a real bark every day. Bella immediately moved to comfort him, but she kept one eye on James, as if making sure he understood that they were a package deal now. Mother, puppy, and the man who had saved them both. "Welcome to your new family. Dr. Mitchell," Mrs. Watson said with a joy that seemed to fill the entire room. "I have a feeling this is just the beginning of an incredible adventure." 2 weeks had passed since Mrs. Watson had made the most generous gift imaginable, officially transferring Bella's ownership to James while maintaining her role as their beloved honorary grandmother. The house that had once felt empty and haunted by memories of loss was now filled with the sounds of life. Bella's gentle padding across the floors, Storm's increasingly confident attempts at barking, and most surprisingly, James's own laughter, echoing through rooms that hadn't heard joy in months. Storm had grown remarkably in those 2 weeks. What had once been a barely breathing scrap of life was now a robust, playful puppy who seemed determined to explore every corner of his new world. His eyes had fully opened to reveal the most striking blue-gray color, and his personality was emerging with delightful force. He was fearless, curious, and completely devoted to both his mother and the man who had saved his life. James had established a routine that felt more natural and fulfilling than anything he had done in years. His days began with Storm's early morning feeding, followed by breakfast with Bella while the puppy napped. He spent his afternoons reading veterinary journals, while Storm played and Bella supervised, and his evenings were devoted to training sessions and quiet family time by the fireplace. But it was the phone call from Dr. Sarah Chen that morning that would set everything in motion for the next chapter of their lives together. "James, I have a proposition for you." Sarah's voice was filled with excitement. "The Morrison Animal Hospital is looking for a partner. Dr. Morrison is getting ready to retire, and he specifically asked me if I knew any veterinarians who might be interested in taking over the practice with a focus on emergency and rehabilitation." James felt his heart skip a beat. Dr. Morrison's clinic had an excellent reputation, and the opportunity to return to practice in a setting that specialized in the kind of intensive care that had saved Storm felt like destiny calling. "Sarah, I don't know if I'm ready." "James, stop," Sarah interrupted gently. "You saved a dying puppy with nothing but basic supplies and your own skill. You've rehabilitated not just Storm, but his mother too. Most importantly, you've rehabilitated yourself. You're more than ready." As if sensing the importance of the conversation, Bella appeared at James's side, pressing her warm body against his leg in the comforting gesture that had become their signal of mutual support. Storm, now big enough to toddle around on unsteady legs, made his way over as well, plopping down on James's feet with the absolute trust of a child who knows he is completely safe. What would it involve? James found himself asking, surprising himself with how much he wanted to hear the answer. "Dr. Morrison wants to meet with you next week. He's heard about what you did for Bella and Storm. Good news travels fast in the veterinary community. He's particularly interested in your emergency care skills and your approach to rehabilitation. Plus, the clinic has facilities for boarding animals who need extended care, which means you could potentially help other strays like Bella." After hanging up with Sarah, James sat quietly with his new family, considering the magnitude of what was being offered. Returning to veterinary practice would mean long hours, emotional challenges, and the constant risk of losing patients despite his best efforts. But it would also mean the chance to help other animals like Storm, other devoted mothers like Bella, and other heartbroken pet owners who needed someone who truly understood the depth of the human-animal bond. Bella seemed to sense his internal struggle because she moved to sit directly in front of him, her intelligent eyes fixed on his face with an expression that seemed to say, "Whatever you decide, we're with you." Storm, meanwhile, had discovered the fascinating world of shoelaces and was determinedly trying to untie James's sneakers, his tiny tail wagging furiously with concentration. The sight of the puppy's absolute joy in such a simple task made James smile, reminding him of why he had fallen in love with veterinary medicine in the first place. The pure, uncomplicated happiness of healthy animals living their best lives. That afternoon, James made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. He called Dr. Morrison's office and scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday. When he hung up the phone, Bella's tail began wagging as if she had understood every word of the conversation. "You think I should do it, don't you, beautiful girl?" James asked, scratching behind her ears. Bella's response was to grab one of Storm's toys and bring it to James, dropping it at his feet with a playbow that clearly said, "Life is meant to be lived joyfully." The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation. James dusted off his veterinary equipment, updated his licenses and certifications, and spent hours refreshing his knowledge of the latest treatment protocols. Mrs. Watson visited twice, bringing homemade cookies and endless enthusiasm for James's potential return to practice. Bella always did have excellent timing, Mrs. Watson observed as she watched Storm attempt to steal a cookie that was far too large for his tiny mouth. "She knew exactly when you were ready to rejoin the world." The night before his meeting with Dr. Morrison, James found himself unable to sleep. He sat in his living room, watching Bella and Storm sleep peacefully by the fireplace, marveling at how completely his life had changed in less than a month. These two amazing creatures had not only survived against impossible odds, they had transformed his entire understanding of healing, hope, and home. Storm stirred in his sleep and made a small sound that was definitely becoming more like his mother's confident bark every day. Bella immediately lifted her head to check on her baby, then looked over at James with an expression that seemed to say, "Everything is exactly as it should be." As James finally drifted off to sleep that night, his last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for the stormy night that had brought Bella to his door. Sometimes the greatest gifts come in the form of desperate knocks in the darkness, carried by mothers who refuse to give up on love. The meeting with Dr. Morrison would determine whether James was ready to extend that healing to other animals in need, but he already knew the answer. With Bella and Storm by his side, he was ready for anything. The Morrison Animal Hospital was everything James remembered from his veterinary school days, a place where the most challenging cases came for hope when all else had failed. As he walked through the familiar smells of antiseptic and the gentle sounds of animals recovering from surgery, James felt something click into place inside his chest, like a puzzle piece finding its perfect fit. Dr. Robert Morrison was a legend in the veterinary community, a man in his 70s who had dedicated his entire career to saving animals that other doctors had given up on. When he greeted James in his office, his weathered hands were gentle but firm, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen every possible outcome in veterinary medicine. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Morrison said warmly, "I've heard remarkable things about your work with the German Shepherd and her puppy. Sarah Chen tells me it was quite an extraordinary case." James had brought photos and medical records documenting Storm's recovery, but more importantly, he had brought Bella and Storm themselves. The puppy, now 6 weeks old and bursting with personality, had charmed everyone in the waiting room with his bold curiosity and his obvious attachment to James. "They're not just a case to me, Dr. Morrison," James said honestly. "They're my family." "But their story reminded me why I became a veterinarian in the first place." Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly. "The best veterinarians never lose sight of the fact that every patient is someone's beloved family member." "Tell me about Storm's treatment protocol." For the next hour, James found himself back in his element, discussing treatment options, recovery timelines, and the delicate balance between aggressive intervention and allowing natural healing to take its course. Dr. Morrison listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions that demonstrated his deep understanding of both the medical and emotional aspects of veterinary care. Storm, meanwhile, had appointed himself as the official greeter for everyone who entered the office. His tiny tail wagged constantly as he toddled from person to person, completely confident that every human he met would be delighted to make his acquaintance. Bella watched her son's social butterfly tendencies with maternal pride, but she stayed close to James, occasionally resting her head on his knee in a gesture of support and belonging. "Dr. Mitchell," Dr. Morrison finally said, "I'm going to be direct with you. I'm 73 years old, and I'm ready to step back from the daily demands of running this practice. But I don't want to simply sell to the highest bidder or turn this place into another corporate clinic. I want to find someone who understands that veterinary medicine is as much about healing hearts as it is about healing bodies." James felt his pulse quicken. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A partnership that transitions into full ownership over 3 years, Dr. Morrison explained. "You would start immediately, handling emergency cases and rehabilitation patients. Exactly the kind of work you did with Storm. I would mentor you through the business side and gradually reduce my hours. The practice has an excellent reputation, a loyal client base, and the financial stability to support your family." The word family made James glance down at Bella and Storm, both of whom seemed to be listening intently to the conversation. Storm had finally worn himself out with his greeting duties and was now fast asleep against his mother's side, his tiny body rising and falling with complete trust and contentment. "There's something else," Dr. Morrison continued. "So this practice has always reserved space for pro bono work with rescued animals and strays. It sounds like that's exactly the kind of work that brought you back to veterinary medicine." James felt tears threatening as he realized that Dr. Morrison was offering him everything he hadn't even dared to dream of, a chance to return to his calling while honoring the journey that had brought him back to it. More than that, he was being invited to continue helping animals like Bella and Storm who needed second chances at life. "I'd like to accept your offer," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I have one condition." Dr. Morrison raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "Bella and Storm come with me to work. They're part of who I am as a veterinarian now, and I think other animals might benefit from seeing successful rehabilitation stories walking around the clinic." Dr. Morrison's face broke into a wide grin. "Dr. Mitchell, I was hoping you'd say something like that. The best therapy animals are often the ones who have been through their own healing journeys." As if summoned by the mention of therapy work, Storm chose that moment to wake up and toddle over to Dr. Morrison, placing his tiny paws on the older man's leg and looking up with those striking blue-gray eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Well, hello there, young man," Dr. Morrison said softly, reaching down to gently pet Storm's soft fur. "I think you're going to be quite an asset to our team." The paperwork and legal details would take several weeks to finalize, but James would start working immediately, beginning with a trial period that would let both men evaluate whether the partnership was the right fit. Dr. Morrison arranged for James to shadow him for the remainder of the week, observing his techniques and getting reacquainted with the rhythm of a busy veterinary practice. That first afternoon, James found himself working alongside Dr. Morrison on a case that felt like destiny. A young cat had been brought in after being hit by a car, suffering from hypothermia and internal injuries that made her prognosis uncertain. As James helped stabilize the patient, he felt the familiar surge of purpose and focus that he had rediscovered while saving Storm. Bella and Storm had settled into a corner of the treatment room, both seemingly understanding that this was important work that required quiet observation. But James noticed that several of the other animals being treated seemed calmer with Bella's reassuring presence nearby, and Storm's innocent curiosity brought smiles to stressed pet owners in the waiting room. "They're naturals," Dr. Morrison observed as they worked. "Bella has the perfect temperament for a therapy dog, and Storm is going to grow up thinking that helping sick animals is the most natural thing in the world." By the end of that first week, James knew he had found his path forward. The Morrison Animal Hospital felt like home in a way that surprised him with its intensity. More importantly, he could see how his experience with Bella and Storm had prepared him for this next chapter. He understood now what Mrs. Watson had meant when she said that sometimes love means letting go, but it also sometimes means embracing new possibilities that honor what you've learned from loss. The practice officially became Mitchell Morrison Animal Hospital the following month, with James taking on increasing responsibility for emergency and rehabilitation cases. Bella earned her therapy dog certification and became a beloved fixture around the clinic, providing comfort to anxious animals and their worried families. Storm grew into his role as the clinic's unofficial mascot and future therapy dog, his confident personality and obvious health serving as inspiration for other animals, beginning their own healing journeys. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in James himself. The veterinarian who had once lost faith in his abilities had become someone who specialized in impossible cases, not because he believed he could save every animal, but because he understood that sometimes the act of trying, of caring, of refusing to give up, was healing in itself. Every night, as he sat by the fireplace with Bella and Storm, James marveled at the journey that had brought them together. A desperate mother's trust had not only saved her dying puppy, it had saved the man who saved them both, creating a family bound not by biology, but by the deeper connections of choice, healing, and unconditional love. 1 year later, the Mitchell Morrison Animal Hospital had become legendary throughout the city, not just for its exceptional medical care, but for the extraordinary story that had brought its newest partner back to veterinary medicine. Storm, now a magnificent young German shepherd, with his mother's intelligence and his own fearless spirit, had indeed grown up believing that healing was the most natural thing in the world. But it was on a cold November evening that the true power of their story would be revealed in ways that none of them could have anticipated. James was working late, treating a severely injured stray cat that had been brought in by a good Samaritan. When he heard a familiar sound that made his blood run cold, desperate scratching at the clinic's front door, accompanied by the heart-wrenching whimpering of an animal in distress, Storm, who had been napping in his favorite corner of the treatment room, immediately lifted his head, his ears alert. At just over a year old, he had developed an uncanny ability to sense when an animal was in critical need, and his body language told James that whoever was outside needed help immediately. Bella, now wearing her official therapy dog vest, rose from her position near the reception desk, where she had been providing comfort to the cat's rescuer. Her amber eyes met James's across the room, and in that instant, he saw recognition, the same desperate urgency that had brought her to his door exactly 1 year ago. When James opened the front door, he was stunned to see a young golden retriever, barely out of puppyhood herself, holding a tiny, motionless kitten in her mouth. The dog's eyes held the same desperate plea that Bella's had carried that stormy night, the universal language of a mother figure begging for help to save a life that meant everything to her. But what happened next left James absolutely speechless. Bella approached the young golden retriever with calm confidence, gently nuzzling her in a gesture of understanding and support. Then Storm, displaying wisdom far beyond his young age, carefully approached the kitten, sniffing gently and looking up at James with an expression that seemed to say, "This is what we do. This is who we are." The golden retriever, sensing the acceptance and expertise surrounding her, gently placed the tiny kitten at James's feet and stepped back, just as Bella had done a year ago. But instead of cowering in fear and uncertainty, she seemed to draw strength from Bella's presence, as if an older, wiser mother was telling her, "You've done the right thing. This man will help." James knelt down and carefully examined the kitten, his experienced hands immediately assessing the situation. Hypothermia, dehydration, and severe malnutrition. The same life-threatening combination that had nearly claimed Storm's life. But this time James wasn't working alone. He had Bella's calming presence for the distressed golden retriever, Storm's intuitive assistance in providing warmth and comfort, and most importantly, he had the confidence that comes from having saved a life against impossible odds before. "Okay, ladies," James said softly to both mothers, "let's save this little one together." What followed was a scene that would have brought tears to the eyes of anyone who witnessed it. As James worked to stabilize the kitten, Bella positioned herself next to the golden retriever, providing the kind of emotional support that only another mother could give. Storm, meanwhile, seemed to understand exactly what was needed, staying close enough to provide warmth, but careful not to interfere with his human's life-saving work. The golden retriever, who James later learned was named Honey, watched every movement with intense focus, just as Bella had done. But there was something different this time. Instead of the desperate fear and uncertainty that Bella had shown, Honey displayed a kind of calm trust, as if Bella's presence had communicated that they were in the right place with the right people. Over the next several hours, the scene in the clinic became something magical. 3 generations of healing worked together, James with his medical expertise, Bella with her wisdom and maternal comfort, Storm with his youthful energy and intuitive understanding of what was needed, and Honey with her unwavering devotion to the tiny life she had rescued. The kitten, whom they decided to call Hope, responded to treatment even faster than Storm had. By dawn, she was taking nutrition, her body temperature had stabilized, and her tiny voice was growing stronger with each passing hour. But the most remarkable part of the story was what happened as Hope began to recover. Honey, who had clearly been astray herself, began to relax and show her true personality. She was gentle, intelligent, and completely devoted to her adopted kitten daughter. More than that, she seemed to recognize that she had found something she had been searching for, a place where love was understood and nurtured. Dr. Morrison arrived that morning to find his clinic transformed into what looked like a nursery for interspecies families. Hope was thriving under the watchful eyes of not just James, but 3 devoted canine guardians who had each played a role in her rescue and recovery. "James," Dr. Morrison said quietly, his voice filled with wonder, "I think we're witnessing something extraordinary here. This isn't just about veterinary medicine anymore. This is about how love multiplies when it's given freely." As the days passed, it became clear that Honey and Hope were meant to stay. Like Bella and Storm before them, They had chosen their family, and James found himself unable to imagine life without them. Mrs. Watson, now a regular visitor and unofficial grandmother to the growing clan, couldn't have been more delighted. Bella taught them all how to find their way home, she observed one afternoon as she watched the entire family playing in the clinic's recovery yard. She showed Honey that there are people in this world who will move heaven and earth to save a life, and she's showing Hope what it means to be loved unconditionally. The local news caught wind of the story, and soon the Mitchell Morrison Animal Hospital was receiving visitors from across the region. Not just clients seeking medical care, but people who wanted to witness the miracle of interspecies adoption and the healing power of unconditional love. Storm had grown into a magnificent young dog, his blue-gray eyes still holding that same ancient wisdom they had shown as a tiny puppy. He had appointed himself as the big brother to Hope, teaching her the ways of the clinic and showing her that every day brought new opportunities to help healing happen. But perhaps the most profound change was in James himself. The broken veterinarian who had once doubted his purpose had become someone who understood that healing wasn't just about medical intervention. It was about creating spaces where love could flourish, where trust could be rebuilt, and where families could form in the most unexpected ways. As he watched his extraordinary family, 2 dogs, 1 cat, and the humans who loved them all, James realized that the miracle hadn't ended with Storm's recovery. It was continuing to unfold every single day, touching the lives of every animal and human who walked through their doors. 5 years had passed since that fateful stormy night when Bella first appeared at James's door, carrying Storm in her mouth and a mother's desperate hope in her heart. The Mitchell Morrison Animal Hospital had become more than just a veterinary clinic. It had evolved into a beacon of hope for animals and humans alike, a place where miraculous recoveries were not just possible, but expected. Storm, now a full-grown German Shepherd, with the bearing of a king and the heart of a healer, had become the most famous therapy dog in the state. His striking blue-gray eyes, which had first opened to see James leaning over him with love and determination, now provided comfort to countless animals and their families during their most difficult moments. But Storm was more than just a therapy dog. He was living proof that no life is too small to save, no situation too hopeless to overcome. Bella, now approaching her senior years with grace and dignity, had become the matriarch of what everyone called the Miracle Family. She had given birth to 2 more litters over the years, each puppy carefully placed in loving homes, but not before spending their first months learning about compassion and healing in the clinic environment. Her legacy was spreading across the country, as her descendants carried the same intuitive understanding of healing that had made her famous. Hope, the tiny kitten who had been rescued by Honey, had grown into a magnificent cat whose story of interspecies adoption had been featured in veterinary journals and animal welfare publications worldwide. She had become the clinic's official feline ambassador, showing other cats that dogs could be family and proving that love knew no boundaries of species or origin. Honey, the young golden retriever who had learned about maternal love from watching Bella, had become a master at identifying animals in distress. She seemed to have an uncanny ability to sense when strays were nearby, and her gentle approach often convinced frightened animals to accept help when human intervention might have failed. But the most remarkable development had occurred just 6 months earlier, when James received a call that would bring their story full circle in the most incredible way possible. Dr. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Animal Rescue Organization in Portland. I know this might sound crazy, but I think we've found one of Storm's siblings. The call had led to the discovery that Storm had indeed had siblings who survived, but had been separated during their time on the streets. Through a combination of DNA testing and careful detective work, they had located a female German Shepherd named Luna, who shared Storm's distinctive eye color and facial markings. Luna had been rescued as a young puppy and raised by a loving family, but she had always displayed the same intuitive understanding of animals in distress that made Storm special. The reunion between Storm and Luna was emotional beyond words. Despite being separated for over 5 years, they recognized each other immediately. Their body language and play styles so similar, it was as if they had never been apart. More remarkably, Luna seemed to understand instinctively what the clinic was about. Within hours of her arrival, she was providing comfort to scared animals and assisting Storm in his therapy work. Bella's reaction to meeting her daughter after all these years was perhaps the most moving moment in the clinic's history. The two dogs approached each other slowly, sniffing carefully. And then Bella made a sound that James had never heard before, a cry of recognition and joy that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. They spent hours reacquainting themselves, and it was as if a missing piece of Bella's heart had been restored. Dr. Morrison, now in his early 80s but still sharp as a tack, often sat in his favorite chair, watching the extended family interact. "You know, James," he had said recently, "I've been in veterinary medicine for over 50 years, and I've never seen anything like what happens in this clinic. It's not just the medical miracles, it's the way love multiplies here. Every animal that comes through those doors becomes part of something bigger than themselves." The clinic now employed 12 veterinarians, 15 veterinary technicians, and had a waiting list of professionals who wanted to work in an environment where healing was understood to encompass body, mind, and spirit. They had expanded to include a full rehabilitation center, a training facility for therapy animals, and a rescue operation that had saved over 3,000 animals in 5 years. But perhaps the most important development was the Storm Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to funding emergency veterinary care for animals whose families couldn't afford treatment. The foundation had been inspired by the realization that somewhere out there, other mothers like Bella were facing impossible choices about their baby's survival. James often reflected on how completely his life had changed from that broken man who had given up on his calling. He had found his purpose not in spite of loss, but because of how loss had taught him to recognize the preciousness of every life. His work now extended far beyond the clinic walls. He spoke at veterinary conferences, consulted on difficult cases nationwide, and had written a book about the healing power of the human-animal bond that had become required reading in veterinary schools. Mrs. Watson, now 87 and still spry, remained a constant presence in their lives. She had become the unofficial historian of the miracle family, documenting every rescue, every success story, and every life that had been touched by Bella's original act of trust and love. On quiet evenings, when the clinic was closed and the family gathered in James's living room, he would sometimes look around at the incredible collection of souls that now shared his life and marvel at the journey that had brought them together. Bella, now graying around the muzzle but still regal in bearing, would rest her head on his lap with the same trust she had shown that first desperate night. Storm would position himself nearby, always ready to spring into action if needed. Hope would curl up in her favorite spot, purring with contentment. Honey would keep watch by the door, ever alert for animals who might need help. And Luna would patrol the perimeter, making sure her reunited family was safe and secure. As James stroked Bella's soft ears, he would often think about the power of a single moment of compassion, how one decision to open his door on a stormy night had created ripples of healing that had touched thousands of lives. The desperate mother who had trusted a stranger with her dying baby had not only saved her puppy's life, she had saved the man who saved them both, and in doing so, had created a legacy of love that would continue for generations. The story of Bella, Storm and James had become legend in the veterinary world, but more than that, it had become a reminder that miracles are not rare, supernatural events. They are the natural result of love meeting opportunity, of compassion overcoming fear, and of trust triumphing over despair. And in a small clinic where the impossible happened every day, where interspecies families thrived and broken hearts were mended, the miracle continued to unfold, one rescue, one healing, one act of love at a time. If this incredible story of love, trust and second chances touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with everyone who believes in the power of compassion. Subscribe to The Pause Perspective for more amazing true stories about the incredible animals who change our lives in ways we never imagined. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that will restore your faith in love, loyalty, and the miracle of second chances.